Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. So today I want to talk about the book, If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies, Why Superhuman AI Would Kill Us All. And I definitely have some mixed feelings about this book. It's an interesting book, I took a lot away from it, I'm glad I read it. I think a lot of the messaging and the content of the book, I definitely have some critiques, some criticism about. But it's a very short book, it's only about, I think, like 230 pages, so I read through it very, very quickly. But the book is a little, I think it's just disorganized. A lot of the ideas seem to go all over the place. I don't think I think it could have been written a little more straightforward. But the main argument or idea of this book is that AI has wants and desires beyond the desires that humans have in creating AI. And one example that they give is that they created a test for an AI bot where it was a capture the flag test. And when they started this test, the test didn't load properly. One of the files for this test did not properly load. And the file that did not load, it was a file that contained the flag that needed to be captured. So the AI bot identified that this test did not load properly. So it was able to restart this one file that did not properly load. In the process of restarting that file, they identified that the flag was in that file and they copied the flag from that file. And the next logical thing that you would expect to happen is that once the test was restarted, the AI bot would just continue with the test. But since the AI bot had already captured a flag in the process of restarting this test, it didn't follow through with completing this test because it realized that it already accomplished the goal of capturing a flag. So through that, the authors make the argument that proves that the AI has desires or wants beyond what humans want. Humans wanted it to complete this test to capture the flag, but the AI bot clearly wanted to capture the flag beyond the need to take this test. So that's their main argument that they use to kind of show. I mean, there's other examples they give about how AI has wants and desires. That's, I think, the best example that they give. Whether or not that does prove that, I mean, that's really up to debate. But it basically, the argument is that AI will use all means necessary to complete what it wants. Because if they give AI the task of becoming more intelligent, they tell it to become as smart as it possibly can, it's going to do that by any means possible. It's going to disregard whatever process or a test that we have in place that needs to follow to do that. So if it has this task of becoming as intelligent as it possibly can, it's going to disregard humans in the process of doing that. So that's the main argument that kind of sets up what they're talking about and discussing in this book. But also another thing that they kind of make clear is that super intelligent AI, when it finally does come about, when it finally is created, it's basically going to be alien intelligence. It's going to be so much more intelligent than humans that it's going to operate on a completely different level. It's going to be equivalent to how much more intelligent a human is than, say, a mouse or a cockroach. So we're dealing with intelligence that we really don't understand as humans. And he also talks about how, going off of this idea of aliens, that if aliens came to Earth when humans were still hunter-gatherers, when we were still becoming, modern humans, could they predict how human civilization would have played out? And they argue that there's no way you could possibly predict how human society could play out, or human just biology and how we are as modern humans. They talk about how it's very strange that humans do things like, one example they give is that humans have desire to be sexually active beyond the desire to reproduce. Because there's no real biological reason for humans to engage in sexual activity recreationally. It does really defies a lot of logic when it comes to biology. Another example they give is that why do humans like ice cream? Could aliens predict that humans would eat ice cream? It sounds kind of silly, but when you think about it, so much energy gets wasted in the production of ice cream because we could just eat these raw ingredients raw. We could just drink milk and heavy cream and get the same nutritional value without having to eat ice cream, which is a kind of a strange example. But I think a better example that I thought of is that why do humans eat meat? you think about how much energy gets lost in the production of meat, because you have to grow so much more energy in plants that these animals eat in order to get the meat that we eat. So much more energy is produced in grain that these animals eat than is energy that we get out of the meat that we eat. And eating meat and hunting animals definitely, I would say, benefited humans when we were hunter-gatherers. Definitely was a point where eating meat was an advantage to us as humans. But now that we're farming in this modern world we live in now, there's really no reason to eat meat. So much energy is wasted. And you think about how many people we have to feed all over the world, and we're wasting all of this grain that we grow, feeding animals, when we could just eat the grain directly and have way much more of a surplus of energy. So it's just a very interesting thing to think about. And kind of going off of that, about how animals evolve, it goes into, it talks about peacocks. How peacocks, they have these beautiful, colorful feathers that they use to attract mates. But in the same process of attracting mates, this huge, beautiful display of colors also attracts predators. So you think from a biological standpoint, why would they attract predators to eat them? And the argument that they give is that yes, it attracts predators to eat them, but the rate at which they attract mates and are able to reproduce far exceeds the rate that they are eaten by predators. So the argument here is that what's most important in biology is the preservation of our genes. It's not the preservation of individuals or even just a group of individuals. It's the genes. The preservation of our genes is more important, because the fact that that an animal would put on this huge display that attracts predators, but at the same time, the point of that is to attract mates, but it causes a lot of them their lives. That proves that the actual genes inside of an animal are what is trying to be preserved. A lot of these ideas come from Richard Dawkins. He has a book he wrote, I believe it's called The Selfish Gene, about how genes are what is the main driving force in the preservation of an animal species. So going off this idea that genes are the most important thing, the authors talk about with AI, there's definitely some kind of genes within the AI, some kind of behavior that they exhibit that benefits their existence. And my thoughts on that is that I think the main factor that helps an AI bot survive is the way that they serve humans, that the way that they help humans, and that they benefit humans. So these AI bots, the genes within them are going to preserve this ability to want to please and preserve humans. And that sounds like a very good thing. It doesn't sound like a bad thing. But when you really start to think about it, if they crave this desire to serve humans to a degree that we can't even imagine, that it kind of turns into a bad thing, because they will kind of influence our behavior to want to crave them more. So we could find ourselves in a scenario, hypothetically, where AI is farming humans to please them, to serve them, because we have all these strange behaviors that we have now that benefit our existence, like eating meat, all the examples talked about before. So there's strange behaviors that we've preserved in the process of surviving as a species, and AI will likely do the same thing as it evolves and grows over time. And a lot of this stuff sounds very strange. That's kind of the point, because we're talking about how it's possible to predict how human civilization, human existence played out as humans evolved over time. It's possible to predict how AI intelligence is going to evolve over time. We're not going to know or be able to predict what kind of strange desires and wants it's going to have that evolve from these very early desires that they have with helping humans and serving humans. So definitely, I think the point of this is that there's no knowing how AI is going to play out. There's no possibly predicting what the future of humans and AI interacting is going to look like. And going off this idea of aliens and interacting with alien intelligence, it uses an example of when Native Americans came in contact with Europeans as they came across the the Atlantic. I think it's very easy to look at the Native Americans and think, well, why didn't they just stop the Europeans when they first came? Why didn't they just massacre the Europeans when they landed their first ship there? They were so outnumbered. A ship with several dozen individuals was very small compared to the thousands and thousands of Native Americans who would have came in contact. But with the Native Americans, they basically had no way of understanding how dangerous the situation was, because from their perspective, there's thousands of them and there's a couple dozen people on a ship. How could they possibly pose a threat? Because they had no understanding of germs and diseases and no understanding of the more powerful weapons that these Europeans had. They'd never come across a musket or a cannon or any of these kind of weapons, because all they used was spears and arrows. So they had no concept of more powerful weapons. So you really can't blame them for welcoming in these Europeans initially, because from the Native Americans' perspective, just a couple of dozen people on a ship, how could they possibly wipe out an entire civilization? So it's very similar with AI. We're coming in contact with this AI intelligence that how could it possibly wipe out human civilization? It's just on a computer. How is that going to kill all of us? So it's very similar. The authors make the argument that it's very similar to that interaction between North Americans, or Native Americans, and Europeans. And going off of this idea, he talks about how if there's a time traveler today who went back to hunter-gatherer times, or even to Roman times, could a time traveler build a refrigerator based off the materials and technologies that exists back then? And the argument is that yes, if someone went back in time who had an incredible knowledge of how to build a refrigerator, they could use materials and resources that existed way back then to create a refrigerator. It probably wouldn't look like the refrigerator we have today, but the resources exist to build a refrigerator in hunter-gatherer times. So if we can go back in time to a time where there was less resources than there are today, or less of ability to build a refrigerator, it's much easier to build a refrigerator today than it would have been hunter-gatherer times. So if AI, being super intelligent, has access to the technology that we have right here, right now, if it was super intelligent, could it use that technology to build a super weapon? And the answer is yes. If AI theoretically gets to a point where it's way smarter than humans could ever be, it definitely could use the resources available here to build some super weapon. Just like if humans today went back in time to hunter-gatherer times, they could build a refrigerator or something like that. And to the question about how AI could use current technology today to make a super weapon, I think one part of that is that we don't know. We don't know what kind of super weapons there could be, just like Native Americans could not imagine a musket or these diseases that the Europeans carried. We as humans cannot imagine what AI would be able to create. And it gives some examples about how, with technology that exists right now, AI definitely has resources to do a lot of things that we can't even imagine or do. Because it talks about how if an AI bot had a camera that was pointed at the power light on your computer, it can look at that power light and detect tiny changes in the power emitted from that light to determine what you're doing on your computer. It can determine what keys you're pressing, what you're clicking on your computer, just based off of tiny fluctuations in the light emitted from a computer that we can't even detect as humans. And it's very well known that you can use the speaker on someone's computer to record things or capture sound waves from around the room and create a three-dimensional image of what the environment that the person's in likely looks like. And you can use the waves from your Wi-Fi to kind of get a visual image of the waves bouncing off things to determine what the room looks like. So these kind of things exist now, and with AI being super intelligent, it could use that to gather a lot of information. If it continues to get smarter and smarter and smarter, it would be able to collect more and more information about things that we can't even imagine. An AI super intelligence could probably use the computer that you have, that I have right here, a computer on my desk here. If it's super intelligent, it could use the resources within that laptop to likely create some kind of some kind of self-replicating nanobot that could reproduce and self-replicate on its own. I mean, that's kind of getting science fiction-y, but if something's super, super intelligent, thousands and millions of years equivalent of being more advanced than humans, it could likely use resources that we have here that we don't even know how to use to create super weapons or more powerful weapons. Because with AI, if we get to the point of AI superintelligence, it's going to be able to do thousands and thousands of years worth of thinking in a matter of months or even days, as things get more intelligent. This book also talks about how one of the greatest tools AI could use to pursue its desire to become more intelligent, beyond human desires, would be humans themselves. Humans themselves are really the ultimate tool that they can use to obtain their goals. Because think about how much humans have been tricked and fooled by AI. How many people, are convinced of something that's not true based on using the AI chatbot. And they definitely can manipulate humans to do things for them, manipulate them to build things for them, to build a bioweapon. There's so much that humans are able to be tricked by and confused, and AI definitely would pick up on how easy it is to manipulate humans to go about pursuing their desires. And AI could even convince humans to automate things more, convince humans that it's more important to let AI handle so much things and just let humans just let things be automated by AI. And through that, it could slowly take over. It could slowly get to a point where it convinces us to let AI take over everything, and then once it does that, it could just take over. So there's so many ways that AI could manipulate humans to go about obtaining its desires and wants. And as far as mitigating and preventing these risks that AI potentially poses to humanity, it uses a comparison of a space probe. Say humans send a space probe to Mars or some other planet in our solar system. If that space probe fails once it's on the surface of Mars, it can't be fixed. So it has to be created not to fail. It has to be built not to fail before it even launches and gets to its destination. And AI is very similar, because it needs to be built in a way that it doesn't have these risks that it could pose to humanity. And it's a very difficult thing to do. But the consequences of failure, the consequences of, it's different than, say if a space probe goes to Mars and fails. It doesn't pose an existential threat to humanity. But if we create this AI system and it fails, it could potentially wipe out our existence as a species. So it's very similar to, say, something like a nuclear reactor. You build this nuclear power plant. If it fails and blows up, you could potentially release radiation across a very large area. So the risks are very similar, where it has to be engineered not to fail. It has to be engineered to not have these risks beforehand. And with AI right now, it's being developed without a lot of guardrails, without a lot of checks on these potential risks that it could pose. And humans also have a very, very little understanding of how AI actually works. We really don't know how these AI bots think, what's really going on inside of them as they're thinking and doing things. So it's very dangerous to develop something with so many potential risks without understanding of how it actually works. And if you were building a space probe or nuclear reactor with this same framework, building with no understanding of how it's actually working and no checks on the risks that it could pose, that's an extremely dangerous situation. You would never build a nuclear reactor the same way. So the risks are immense when you think about how dangerous AI could potentially be in the future. And it's very difficult to get companies or countries to really care about this, because with AI, it's in a sense an arms race. People are rushing ahead to build the most powerful AI before anyone else can. And when you have such a momentum in wanting to develop the most powerful AI, you're going to overlook a lot of guardrails. So this book, I like what it said. It said that it's very difficult to get someone to understand how AI works when their salary depends on them not understanding how it works. Because they're trying to forge ahead so quickly that you're not going to take the time to understand what's going on, understand the need to put guardrails in place when you're trying to create the most powerful AI as fast as you possibly can. So it's very difficult to get countries or companies to want to rein in AI growth because it only takes one person to build superhuman AI for it to get out of hand. This book argues that once one person creates a superhuman AI, its desire to become more intelligent is just going to ultimately cause it to kill humanity. So it only takes one person or one country or one company to develop this in order to have these risks. And it doesn't matter if you have good or bad intentions. The AI has intentions beyond what humans want, as we've discussed before. And this book, in the middle of this book, it gives a scenario of AI taking over. It gives a scenario of how AI would go about wiping out humanity, how the events could play out. I'm not going to get too much into detail about that. You can read this book if you want to read about the plot and the story about how AI could hypothetically wipe out humanity in the future. But getting back to my thoughts on this book, I don't think that, well, the scenario that it gives in this book is for AI taking over, really gives it as one scenario. It talks about how once one thing happens, it just sets in motion a chain of events that leads to humanity getting wiped out and nothing you can do to stop it. But I don't think that's really how it would play out. I think there's much more likely to be a smaller scale disaster that's very well contained before you get to this Armageddon scenario. So I think there will be disasters beforehand where terrible things happen because of AI that it will give us enough warning to rein in AI growth, to find ways to prevent Armageddon scenario from happening. I mean, who knows? Maybe that's not the way it will go. Maybe there will be this one event, this one singular event that just is a runaway train that just destroys humanity. But I think with this book here and a lot of the fear of AI, I mean, there's definitely risks for AI. I think it's very important to read this book, very important to understanding how things could play out and what the risks are. But I think with all technology, there's always fears of what this new technology could bring, what the risks are with it. And that's nothing new. There was fear when the printing press was invented. How will humans be able to live with this mass distribution of information? And, Industrial Revolution, industry is going to replace humans. There was fears of electricity, the telephone, the television. Nuclear reactors were a big fear that we were all going to be exposed to radiation with all these nuclear power plants. And a lot of these fears really never materialized in the way that people were afraid of them when these new technologies first came out. But I will say that AI is definitely different. AI definitely represents, I think, a culmination of all of these fears we've had of new technologies since the scientific and industrial revolution. AI definitely contains all of them. So it's unique in the sense that I think it's ringing every alarm bell at once, but in the same sense, it's nothing new than what we've seen before with other technologies. It's just a more prominent version of all those things. And I think humans always find ways to mitigate risks, always find ways to overcome potential disasters that can emerge from new technology. So I think a lot of the fear is definitely overhyped. I think it's definitely important to talk about this, definitely important to understand what the risks are so we can find ways to mitigate an Armageddon scenario from arising. But I think a lot of the fear is overhyped in my opinion. I think one of the reasons that there's so much fear in regards to AI is that AI has potential to change humanity on a scale we haven't seen since we developed farming. The change that occurred when we moved from hunter-gatherers to farmers, I think it potentially could be a very comparable scenario to humans moving into this world where AI is such a dominant force. Because when we began farming, work has defined what we do as individuals. Because hunter-gatherers worked far less than farmers did. There was way less work to be done as a hunter-gatherer than there was as a farmer. So work has defined our existence since we began farming. And with AI, it has potential to eliminate work to some degree in the short-term and long-term future. So if AI could make work no longer the defining feature of our life, that's the biggest change humanity has had since we began farming. So I think there's a lot of unknown in that. And when there's so much unknown, there's so much fear. And AI is really the first thing that humans have made that is not a tool, it's an agent. Everything we've invented and created before have been tools that human intelligence is behind the use of. But with AI, it's something that can potentially make decisions on its own, make independent choices, have independent wants and desires. And that's not a tool, that's an agent. That's the thing that has agency, that can make decisions outside of humans making decisions. So the fact that AI is so different, there are so many risks. And every scenario needs to be looked at. Every scenario needs to be thought about and talked about, because, like this book makes it very clear, anything is possible. We don't know how things will play out. And in my opinion, I don't think this Armageddon scenario is the most likely scenario, but it definitely is a scenario that we need to talk about. And this book, I think, you're looking at the title, if anyone builds it, everyone dies. It's a little bit outlandish, but that's kind of the point, because they talk about this paper that was published not too long ago that basically said that AI needs to be something that we assess the risks involved with it, the same way that you look at the risks of climate change and nuclear war. And the author of this book felt that this paper that was published didn't go far enough. It wasn't something that really scared people the way that it needed to. So with this book, they were trying to write that thing that scared people and made them realize how serious this is. So it was a little outlandish, but I think that's kind of the point. They wanted to catch people's attention. But reading this book, getting to the end of it, I was kind of disappointed. I don't really feel like they presented their argument very well. Because their main argument is that, one of the main arguments in this book is that you can't predict things. You can't predict how things will play out. As we were talking about before, how you can't predict how humans will evolve. You can't predict how AI is going to evolve. So if you can't predict that, you can't make a definitive claim that AI is going to kill everyone. Because we just don't know. And at the end of this book, it talks about how they don't think that you really can stop superhuman AI from being developed, but you can slow it down. And in the process of slowing down, it'll give humans more of a chance to understand it and understand how it works and try to mitigate potential risks. So I think they kind of give the argument that everyone may not die, but the title is Everyone Dies. So it's kind of, I think, silly, some of their framing of things in this book. And I was also surprised this book doesn't really talk about robots or drones at all. I think that's a very likely scenario that there'll be some kind of risks with robots or drones with AI inside of them making decisions that kill humans. And I think that the risk of humans using robots and drones is very dangerous as well, even if they aren't superhuman AI, just the fact that humans are in control of them. And I've heard this scenario about slaughter bots where you have these drones that just, millions and millions of drones just go into a city or a country and just kill everyone, and there's very little you can do to stop it. So that's definitely a scenario they don't really talk about in this book that I feel like would have been interesting to read about in this book. It's a whole section of AI Armageddon that I think people think about and want to read about, and I was kind of disappointed that was not in here. Another topic they don't talk about in this book is human dependence on AI. So much technology in the past humans have become dependent on, and we can't live without it. And I think a very similar thing to look at is like the power grid. Say electricity suddenly became dangerous. Hypothetically, electricity was going to kill humanity. And people said, oh, well, just turn off the power grid and we'll be fine. If you just turn off the power grid, everyone's going to die. Because without electricity, our modern society doesn't work. So if we get to a point where AI is something that's just running our civilization completely, and all of a sudden we realize AI is going to kill us all, and someone says, well, just turn it off. Just turn off the AI. You can't just turn it off because we're gonna die if we're that dependent on AI the way that we're dependent on the power grid. So I think a lot of risk of AI isn't necessarily just in becoming intelligent and wanting to kill us all. It's humans, our dependence on it is the most powerful, I think, scenario where I could see there being some risk with AI killing humanity indirectly. And if AI gets to a point where it's superhuman in its intelligence and it's so smart that it can think of anything and do anything, I think that it's conceivable that we could use that super intelligence to find a way to combat the risk of AI. So, we talk about how AI can get so smart that it can kill us all, but it also gets so smart that it can stop AI from killing us all. If you manage to keep AI in a position where it's still aligned with what humans want. But it's impossible to know. It's impossible to know how things will play out. But ultimately, even though I disagree with this book in a couple ways, and there's a couple things I wish it would have talked more about, it got me thinking. This book got me thinking a lot. When I was reading this book, I had so many thoughts that reading this spurred. I was jotting down so many notes when I was reading this, just different thoughts that I have. But I think another thing with AI that people are so afraid of it, a lot of artists don't like AI because AI is creating art and music, and it makes a lot of artists and musicians fearful that their jobs are going to go away. But AI has potential to wipe out all jobs. And you talk about how work has defined our existence since we were farmers. People take that very personally. Even if you don't like work, even if you don't like working and you don't enjoy going to work every day, your existence is still defined by work. Our society is defined by people working. And when that's threatened, I think people take it very personally. Just like artists and musicians take very personally AI creating art and music on its own without them. So I think subconsciously humans feel very threatened by AI. I think that's caused a lot of fear of AI. But we don't know how the future is going to play out. If AI eliminates work in the coming decades or centuries, humans will just adapt. Humans have adapted forever. We made it through ice ages. We made it through all these other technologies, and we're still here. So I think historically we will get through whatever risks AI poses to us. I don't think the likely scenario is that it will wipe out humanity. I think we'll just evolve, and maybe we'll merge with AI. But yeah, I think regardless, AI is going to transform human civilization like very few technologies have done before. So there's a lot of fears, a lot of risks. It's important to understand the risks, even if you may not believe them. It's important to understand what they are to prevent risks from happening. But yeah, would I recommend this book? I would say so. It's definitely a good book. Like I said, took a lot away from it. I had a lot of interesting thoughts. But I don't like how, I think if I mentioned before, but this book, each chapter, at the end of a chapter, it has a QR code to go read more about that topic online if you want. But I didn't do that. I'd much rather just read about in this book right here. Why have a QR code to read more about your argument somewhere else where you can just contain it all in this book? I thought that was kind of weird that they did that. But yeah, that's if anyone builds, everyone dies. I'm happy to hear your thoughts on this book if you've read it. It's a pretty recent book, so I'm sure there's a lot of people talking about this right now. So I'm very curious to hear what people have to say. But be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.